Welcome. Welcome to all of you and good evening. I am Sister Maria Orlandini with Franciscan Action Network, and together with Nuns Against Gun Violence and Franciscan Peace Center, we have been working to present this webinar today. We are grateful, really grateful, you have chosen to spend this time with us in learning about what is happening about gun violence prevention efforts. The number one cause of young people's death in our country is gun violence. And now, in this particular time in our country, we see the progress we have made to make our country safer sent backwards, not forward. Now, as never before, we need to support one another, encourage one another, not to give up, and learn from each other what can be done. And this is the intent of this webinar. So welcome. Just a reminder that the webinar will be recorded, so it will be sent out after tonight. And now, just to start us off, as we start many things in our lives, Sister Dorothy will start us off with a prayer.
Just a word before I begin the prayer. I want you to know that the prayer is adapted from a prayer poem written by Sister Rayfield Considine, a sister of the presentation from Australia. And the scripture comes from Esther, the book of Esther. Just a few short weeks ago, our Jewish brothers and sisters celebrated the Feast of Purim, the feast in which Esther was asked by her uncle to put her life on the line to save the people. And isn't that what we are all about? So let us pray. The pilgrims paused on the ancient stones in the mountain gap. Behind them stretches the roadway they traveled, already a far journey. Was it really a lifetime? Ahead, mist hid the track. Unspoken, the questions hovered above them. Why go on? Is life not short enough? Why seek to pierce its mystery? Why venture further on strange paths, risking everything? Surely that is a gamble for fools or lovers. Why not return quietly by the known road? Why be a pilgrim still? I say to you, this is your Trasna. Your God is asking you to come to the crossing place. Choose to go back if you must. You will find your way easily by yesterday's roads. Go back if you must. You can pitch your tent by yesterday's fires. There may be life in the embers yet. If that is not your deep, deep desire, then stand still. Lay down your load. Gently now, you are trusted with something precious. Take your life firmly in your hands while you search your heart's yearnings. What am I seeking? What is my quest? When your star rises deep within you, trust yourself to its leading. You will have light for your first steps. This is the time. This is the moment. This is the crossing place. Choose to make a difference. And let the people say, Amen.
Thank you, Sister Dorothy, for that beautiful opening prayer. And thank all of you for joining us this evening, for making connections and building hope, gun violence prevention in Pennsylvania. This is the first in a series of webinars featuring work for gun violence prevention at the state level. Tonight, our webinar will focus on the state of Pennsylvania. Together, our speakers will reflect on ways people can be involved in gun violence prevention and community support, as well as where they find hope for the future. Our panelists this evening are Lashira Council from the Chester Community Coalition, Adam Garber from CeaseFire, Pennsylvania, Representative Lisa Borowski, and Senator Tim Kearney. We're going to begin with Senator Tim Kearney. He has recorded his words of wisdom. And then we will continue with Representative Lisa, Lashira, and finish up with Adam Garber. And let us begin. I guess we had a little sound difficulty there that we're working on.
My apologies for that issue right now. It's not letting me share sound, which is intriguing. So I think Laura is going to jump on and see if she can get the video to play. We practiced this earlier. It worked completely fine.
Well, then I don't mean to throw a fly into the ointment here, but maybe Representative Lisa can start us off. We'll just reverse it. Maybe we can hang it in before we hear from Adam. So Lisa, you want to share your story, why you're doing this tonight, why you're here with us?
Sure. Well, first of all, I am State Representative Lisa Borowski. I represent areas of Delaware County, a county in southeastern part of Pennsylvania, about 12 to 13 miles outside of the city of Philadelphia. So not too far. I had the pleasure of meeting Sister Pat at a CeaseFire event several weeks ago, and that's how I came to know the sisters and their work, what they are doing. So it's myself, I've been a rep now I'm starting my third year, so my second term. I was originally elected in 2022, and gun safety was a huge issue in my election in 2022, and continues to be a huge issue in my district. So I represent a suburban district. Do you want me to wait now so you can share the video, or do you want me to go on?
I'd like to have you continue. And
Okay.
then
Okay, so I represent a suburban district, a district where people are very engaged and interested in gun safety and what we can do to influence the legislation or
All righty. Thank you very much, Lisa. I'm still impressed. I heard that story, your sharing of that a few weeks ago, and it's still very impressive. I think, Jennifer, will now switch to Senator Kearney.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you to the Nuns Against Gun Violence for organizing tonight's webinar. My name is Tim Kearney. I represent parts of Delaware County in the Pennsylvania Senate. Gun violence is a huge issue for my constituents, who often travel to Harrisburg to lobby other lawmakers for common sense legislation to stop this uniquely American crisis. From red flag laws to lost and stolen gun registries, from safe storage requirements to regulating ghost guns, we have many good ideas for how to save lives and make our communities safer. The Senate Democratic Caucus has introduced dozens of bills and strongly fought for them. However, in the Republican-controlled Senate, all these bills have never been allowed to move. I'd like to come before you tonight with a hopeful message about what we can accomplish in this legislative space. But I want to be frank, and to be clear, there will be no substantive progress without electoral change. Even when Democrats have the majority, often by thin margins, they lack the cohesive strength to get the job done. All the facts, all the good cause in the world will not persuade policymakers who are more accountable to the politics of their voters than they are to common sense. We will not be able to advance on this issue without strong community organizing and mobilization. So I encourage you to continue your essential organizing work. Our issues with ongoing gun violence will only be exacerbated by the types of discussions happening in Washington. Proposed cuts to Medicaid, will increase gun violence in poor communities and close health services needed to care for victims of gun violence, like EMS and hospitals. We know this all too well here in Delaware County, the impacts of an ongoing health crisis as we continue to deal with the fallout of our collapsing Crozer health system, especially as Crozer Chester serves as our only trauma center for the county. But we remain committed to ensuring that our hospital and EMS system is saved so that we can provide health care to all, including victims of gun violence. Also important is the work to find common ground on mental health, violence prevention programs, and equitable school funding. It's important to give youth an alternative path to violence. I'm proud to now serve as the co-chair for the After School Caucus that will be focusing its efforts on getting additional funding for the brand new Building Opportunity Through Out of School Time, also known as BOOST. This new program had an initial investment of $11.5 million and helps give our youth greater after-school opportunities. This investment was combined with our Commonwealth's continued investment in violence prevention for a total of over $56 million. It does show that there are continued opportunities for our legislature to work across the aisle on this issue as we continue to push for meaningful, common sense gun laws that we would all like to see. I want to thank you for your continued work, your advocacy, and encourage you to continue to contact your legislators as we continue this fight. I remain committed to the cause and will work on getting my colleagues in Harrisburg to pass these needed reforms and investments. Thank you.
Wow. He did share his words of wisdom, very powerful. Now I'm going to ask if Lashira Council from the Chester Community Coalition could share her story.
Hello, hello, everyone. Thanks again for the invite. This feels like a full circle moment for me. I will say, back in May 7th, 2002, my brother passed away as a result of gun-related violence. And on the journey to find purpose behind the pain, I ran into Chester Community Coalition. I was attending a community outreach event and I came across the table ran by the former executive director, and she started to inform me of the therapeutic supportive services that the coalition was offering. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really specific and targeted and intentional. And so I wanted to, volunteer as a licensed professional counselor, and she did inform me that they had a part-time opportunity. So 5 years ago, I joined Chester Community Coalition as a part-time therapist and recently transitioned to the executive director role. At Chester Community Coalition, we offer case management support to individuals and families who have been impacted by gun-related violence. We also offer, at no cost, individual therapy, family grief therapy, as well as outreach to the community. And I will say, as we continue to increase our outreach efforts, the community's response is always like, wow, I never knew you all existed. And they're very interested in the work that we do. Our participants also provide some positive feedback as it relates to the services. As like I said, they are very targeted and intentional, as our goal is to take the holistic approach to trauma-informed care. So not just the therapy, we also want to support with meeting some of those basic needs and making connections, because we can't do it all. We make those connections as well. So again, back to this full circle moment. I often can't believe that I'm actually in this role now, but it's one that I am very grateful to be in and to be a part of the healing process for our community.
Well, thank you, Lashira. I continue to be in awe of all the good work that the agency does, but the work that you have done personally. You really are a great example of somebody who advocates not only for the victims, not only for those who immediately shot, but the ongoing support for those who have been victims of gun violence, and that includes the entire neighborhood.
Yeah.
So Adam, you've got a tough act to follow here. You ready to continue? Adam?
I will do my best. Always tough after Lashira and Lisa and everyone, but it's good to be with folks tonight. I'm going to take a quick step back because I think it will help frame kind of how we came up with our policy agenda. And while I'm going to talk about Pennsylvania, I think we have people from around the country on here. Most of the numbers I'm going to kind of share broadly are going to be true everywhere, but I'll give some specific kind of Pennsylvania context here. And so when we think about gun violence, I think for most people, they think of it as a urban problem in our cities when we're talking about shootings and homicides, or they think of it as mass shootings, those horrific moments, whether at our schools or our movie theaters or where have you, that take the lives of many people quickly and destroy a moment of peace and fun. The reality is just on the whole, gun violence in those areas are often centered in our urban and I'd say suburban areas. But the reality is gun violence is a statewide problem. It impacts our urban communities, our suburban communities, our rural communities. And in fact, 60% of all gun deaths nationwide are from firearm suicide, which in a moment of crisis, often someone unfortunately turns to a gun and are gone and make a permanent choice over a temporary crisis. And so when we started with that, we thought, well, we need to reshape this conversation a little bit because the work that's happening in places like Chester and Philadelphia and in our cities is critical, and the work that's happening in our suburban communities is critical. But as you heard from Senator Kearney, as you heard from Representative Borowski, from a political perspective, and I think this is true everywhere, when we're talking about advancing policy, we need everyone to be concerned about it and people care about what's happening in their backyard. And so the common agenda that we put together came from this lens of everyone is being impacted, that this is a statewide and a nationwide problem, and that we need a set of solutions that would save lives no matter where you lived, and therefore bind our communities together through their common grief and loss, and recognize that whether it's Lashira losing her loved one or my friend Maura in Lancaster losing her son, that they are still feeling trauma and grief years later from the loss of their loved ones. And through that, they have a common purpose to prevent it. And so through that lens, the common agenda came together to bring together partners in the community violence prevention space, survivors, faith leaders, and doctors to say, we have a set of solutions we're going to advance. And so I'll talk quickly about them, and then I'll add one more in because it's an important one. So we have focused on 4 solutions to really look at how to solve this problem. And these, again, are Pennsylvania specific. I can happily try my best to answer about other states, but I also just recommend the Giffords website has really great state-by-state data. So the first is secure storage. A responsible gun owner secures their firearms. I heard from a mom today who lost their daughter to an unsecured firearm a few years ago in an unintentional shooting. They thought it wasn't loaded. It was sitting out on a counter. And bottom line is, if you're not using your gun, you should have it locked up in a safe or with a proper locking device. It should be unloaded. This is what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends. And it prevents suicide, it prevents community violence, and it prevents mass shootings. We actually know that 80% of people that are involved in a shooting around a school, so within a few blocks of a school, get their firearms from family members or friends because they often, as youth, don't have legal access to firearms. And those unsecured guns become a massive way into it, as well as a significant portion of guns used in homicides are actually lost or stolen guns that were unsecured. The second is our background check system, which is really, when we think about how this all works, we've decided some people pose a danger to the community. That may be because they have some past history of being involved in violence. It may be because they have a protection from abuse order. And the first step in keeping a firearm from them is making sure they can't go into a store and buy them. And so the background check system is the first check. In Pennsylvania, we have quite a good background check system. We have a state-based one, not just the national one, that checks a whole set of records. But we have one gap, which is you can buy a long gun, like an assault weapon, without getting a background check from an unlicensed seller, so a private individual. So if I was buying an AR-15 from Representative Borowski, which I can't imagine really happening, I could just go to Representative Borowski. She wouldn't need to run a background check on me and understand if I had, a protection from abuse order issued against me. The third is known as extreme risk protection orders, or often known as red flag laws. And what we know is that people that are involved in violence often leak out that information. They tell it on social media, they tell it in other communities, they tell their friends and family. They may not say, I'm going to go shoot someone or hurt myself, but they are giving indicators. And extreme risk protection orders are simply a mechanism to say, look, for a time period of about a year, depending on the order, you can't have access to firearms. And then you go through a judicial process, so there's judicial review, and someone like a family member or the law enforcement community, a close family member or law enforcement, would petition a judge and say, here's the risk. And that might be that they've made a set of clear risk. It might be, indicators of abuse. It can be a whole set of things, of indicators that are proven to be tied to likeliness of violence. And if the judge looks at all the evidence and says, look, there's a real risk here that a mass shooting is going to happen or something else, then they'll issue the order. And for up to a year, you can't access, own, or buy a firearm. They have been found to cut suicides by 17% in Indiana. So they give someone an opportunity when someone is in crisis to temporarily remove their access to firearm. And in California, they were found to stop a number of mass shootings when police couldn't intervene. In other ways, they were able to go to the courts, get these orders when people were threatening to shoot up schools, centers, churches, and other places. Those are the main ones that we're talking about, with one other that's increasingly, still important, which is banning ghost guns, which are untraceable firearms. These you can build in your home. Right now, with the federal law, they have to be serialized, and you need to buy a background check to buy the kits, but you can still 3D print guns. And it's just back to the background check system. If I can order a bunch of parts and easily in an hour or two put a gun together in my home without getting a background check, it makes sense that if I want to hurt someone else, it's the only reason I would do that. And it makes it really hard for law enforcement to trace these. We saw a huge spike a few years ago in these. Luckily, the ATF clamped down on the rules around them. The Supreme Court just upheld that, but we need state laws in case there are federal rollbacks under the current administration. The last piece of our agenda has been really successful currently. So as you heard from Senator Kearney, from Representative Borowski, it's really hard to pass policy in Pennsylvania. I was just talking to my friends in Wisconsin. The same thing I could say for my friends in Wisconsin. Many states, and even in our bluer states, it's hard. One of the biggest successes is investment in programs like Lashira's violence prevention programs. We have put $240 million into those in Pennsylvania in the last 4 years. And the results speak for themselves. Gun deaths in Pennsylvania are down 38% in the last 2 years. That number mirrors it dropping all over the country where these investments were made. And in some of our cities like Philadelphia, we've seen a 52% drop. We need those resources to continue to flow. The informed care that Lashira gives, the counseling, the support that her team gives is critical to prevent retaliation, to help communities heal, because we know hurt people hurt people. And I want to just really illustrate this with a story and a report, and then I'm going to pass it back to Pat here. We just released a report because I think people, including myself, honestly, when I started this job 5 years ago, had trouble understanding what this looked like. So one of our partners in the Lehigh Valley, which is north of Philadelphia, shared this story with us. There's hospital-based programs where they're going in and they're working with someone who was shot and injured in an act of gun violence. And in this case, the worker went in, the outreach worker, and it was an individual who was shot by a former friend, and they were in opposite gangs at this point, and they got in conflict and he got shot by him. And so he's in the hospital bed, he's still recovering, he's talking to some of his friends who are probably in the same gang, and he's talking about retaliating, about going and shooting his former friend, right? This is really honestly normal. You're angry, you're hurt, you're trying to act back out. And the outreach worker was able, in that moment, while he's still healing, to start to talk through those emotions and talk through the experience, and was able to counsel him off retaliating. And so he didn't shoot his friend back. And he never went. And in fact, he eventually got out of that life and became an outreach worker with them. And so it was a moment where they were able to turn that act of violence not into more violence. Violence didn't beget violence, but because there was a person working to intervene in that moment, which is exactly the kind of work that Lashira's team does and so many other teams do. And so those investments have been hugely successful around the country. So that's in a nutshell our common agenda. We're really honored to have support not just from Lashira and Senator Kearney and Representative Borowski, but it's really built around this ideal that gun violence happens everywhere, and everyone should feel safe and be safe. And so we can put policies together to protect you in all forms of this violence so we can save lives everywhere. And back to you, Pat.
Thank you, Adam, and thank you for tossing it back to me. I tell you, the story is powerful, the agenda is powerful, and I think all the stories, the sharings we have heard tonight. Now, we do have some specific questions for our panelists, and I'm just going to remind them what the questions are. So first of all, like, in what ways are you willing to support CeaseFire's 2025 common agenda? And I think everybody on this call tonight is familiar with it. And then from your perspective, what are the policies, the legislation that needs to be dealt with in order to make a significant change in the state of Pennsylvania? And then it's like, what are you hearing from your constituents? What are you hearing from others related to gun violence? Now, don't be shy. You're free to start at any time.
Do you want me? I can speak from the legislative perspective if you want, and I'll certainly let Lashira. She will definitely, I think, have a really good perspective when it comes to community for sure. And I can't echo enough the importance of Lashira's work. And as Adam said, so I worked for many years in hospitals in the city of Philadelphia. I worked with one of our emergency room physicians that ran our trauma intervention program. And the success of those programs when it comes to helping people deal with the trauma, whether they've been shot or if they have a loved one that's been shot. That's the other avenue of this. You know, the people who, you know, you personally may want to retaliate, but you've got people around you that may also want to do that. And so they used to also work with the families. They did this work right in our emergency departments, like right when people came in. So it is so important, and I couldn't agree more that the investment there is essential. When it comes to legislation, and, you know, again, I've only been at this for 2 years, but I will say when I joined the legislature, when I was sworn in 2023, we flipped the Pennsylvania State House for the first time to Democratic, the first time in 12 years. So when I say the Democrats kind of like took the cork out of the bottle and went crazy and were like, we're going to pass all this legislation that we haven't been able to pass because we haven't had a Democratic majority. Well, lo and behold, some of this legislation, just because you have a full Democratic majority, everyone doesn't always march in lockstep. And there are, you have to consider where areas that people represent. There are areas of Pennsylvania that are extremely rural where, you know, people having guns is normal. Kids getting off from school to go hunting for the first opening day of hunting season and things like that. So there's a lot of responsible gun owners, but people who are concerned about legislation impacting their ability to use their guns that, you know, even though they're responsible gun owners, they're concerned about that. So we, in some cases, some legislation, it didn't pass. We had one piece of legislation that I know that we worked on that did not pass. I think that was the safe storage. I think at the time, wasn't that, Adam? The safe storage did not pass, which you would think. Was that Darisha Parker's bill, I think?
Yeah, we didn't run that bill. The lost and stolen reporting bill failed,
That's the one.
did, and then so did, later Glock switches, which just passed in Alabama, and a bill that's a little complicated, but about gun trafficking for the shorthand version.
Yeah. So we were able to pass in our 23-24 legislative session. We did pass background checks out of the House. We did pass extreme risk protection orders. We also we were able to pass the oh my goodness, now I'm forgetting the third one that we passed.
Ghost
Adam,
guns.
remind me.
Ghost guns.
Ghost guns, yes. So, but passing all gun legislation, even though you have a majority of people that you think are like-minded, is not always easy. And you also sometimes need help from the other side. So one of the things I would say legislate, and then honestly, like once things pass out of the House, we have a Republican majority Senate and a Senate leadership, and I wouldn't say this is all of the members of the Senate, but Senate leadership that is reluctant to run this legislation when it moves forward. So I think legislatively and what people can do is reach out to your reach out to your legislators. They need to know how important it is that you see this legislation pass and move forward. And it doesn't matter whether you're, even if you have a legislator, I hear from my constituents all the time about the importance of gun safety legislation. They want to know what's happening with it. They want to know where it's going. But I appreciate that. Like I want to hear from them, although I'm, kind of marching in lockstep with them on that. But you need to reach out and you need to talk to your legislators. They need to hear from you. They need to know how their constituents are feeling, because that is what should be leading them to decide on how they're voting on this legislation. I think that is the most important thing. I know for me, that is the most influential thing. People think that it's lobbyists and all that kind of stuff. It's not. It's the voters. It is the people that you represent, and what you hear from them is the most important thing, or it definitely should be. So that's kind of just, I guess, a little bit of the legislative environment. Certainly Adam, works in this all the time, but it's important to know that everyone comes from different backgrounds and different philosophies, and we need to try to find, like, where's that common ground on this legislation that we can tap into so that people can say, that's important to me. I'm willing to make that vote, because it could be a tough vote sometimes. That helpful?
Okay, I'll jump right in. I do want to piggyback off of Adam regarding the Hospital Link Violence Intervention Program that Chester Community Coalition has through a partnership with Crozier. First, I do have to acknowledge, I'm sorry about my lighting right now. I look like I'm like spooky. Woo. But that golden hour, that hour after they're stabilized, in which we take the opportunity to talk about the emotional, mental impact and have a transparent conversation about retaliation and the risk for retaliation. And like Representative Borowski mentioned, like there are times in which the survivor is not as interested in retaliating as a family member or a friend. So having a conversation or just trying to strategize around the conversation that they will have with their friends and loved ones who are more interested in retaliating. And that happened recently, actually, with one of our most recent participants who was a survivor. As it relates to like what we all can do, I know for Chester Community Coalition, we have also been intentional with inviting our community members and participants to Advocacy Day, and exposing them to parts of the system that impact some of the community-related violence that occurs. So they can also see what other opportunities exist for them to find purpose behind their pain.
Thank you. Thank you. Adam, any response back?
Yeah, I think both of us are realizing it's not as bright out as late as we thought it would be. And I'm like, oh, where did my lights come from? Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that was said. I think that, well, so a few things. So I think just, again, trying to think about like where we are and people from around the country, I do think there are always going to be paths forward on gun safety policies. And I think two ways to think about it are always like, one, what is the community experiencing? And I'll give a really good example of this. So not a Pennsylvania one. So Alabama, which is about as conservative as it comes, passed a ban on Glock switches, which are these little devices you attach to a handgun to turn it into an automatic fire weapon. So a handgun that could spew up to 800 bullets in a minute. The only purpose is to cause carnage. This isn't for self-defense because it's totally inaccurate. It's not for target practice or anything else like that. It is intended to cause mass carnage as quickly as possible. And you can print them or buy them for $20. They're really easy to access. And about a year ago, there was a shooting. I think it was in Birmingham, but it might have been in Montgomery. A number of individuals, I think it was at a birthday party, were killed and injured. A really big mass shooting, really notable, hadn't happened for a while in Alabama. And some of the mayors started to get together with the law enforcement community. And I got to hear the mayor of the Birmingham or Montgomery, I'm so sorry, speak about this at an event in DC. And started to put together with law enforcement what was going. Because if you're a police officer in this case, you don't want to confront someone with an automatic weapon. You don't want to confront someone with functionally a machine gun either. And so law enforcement and the community leaders got together with some Republican legislators and found a path to ban Glock switches. And Governor Ivey, who's a Republican legislator, signed the law. Now, that took a lot of work. It was not easy. And I say that, and we haven't quite gotten there yet in Pennsylvania for sure. And I think there's some reasons. But I think that, what brought it together was this real understanding of how it was impacted by the community, right? 1 in 5 Americans know someone who's died from gun violence. 1 in 5 Americans. That means definitely your conservative, Republican, gun owning, whatever friends have probably lost someone or been impacted by gun violence. This is everywhere. And so I think, unfortunately, within this crisis and where we are, there are opportunities to find paths forward. And then I think at the same time, we are the majority. On things like extremist protection orders, 70% of Pennsylvanians support them. And that number stays true whether you're talking about gun owners, you're talking about Republicans, you're talking about Trump voters. I was at a hearing in Delaware County in Rep. Borowski's district last week, 2 weeks ago now, on ghost gun bans, and 3 people who voted for President Trump got up and said, I voted for President Trump, but I believe in banning ghost guns. We shouldn't have untraceable firearms. I think there's a lot of common ground, but when we bring in the politics of the NRA and this ideal that we can't agree has really transformed the politics in a way that we can't find progress. I think what's great about this thing tonight is faith becomes that common ground for us. So I'm not Christian, I'm Jewish, but we're working with a lot of synagogues, and I came to this work. Sorry, my phone's ringing and it's probably kind of my sound. But I came to some of this work originally around this ideal that we have an obligation to start the work, that we're never going to finish it, as our governor likes to say, and he quotes Prepay a Vote, which we won't get into tonight despite being a faith call. But I got into I think that there's this opportunity to bring people together because all faiths recognize and sanctify life. And so I think there's an opportunity here too to talk about what we're losing and how we can save it together. So that's like my thoughts on it.
Thank you, Adam. It's still a bit early to go into Q&A, but there is one question that has come out, and we talked about the bills. So if you're looking at the bills, and maybe this be from you, Adam, all these bills are important. What bill would you think is the most important to start with? Then I think Lisa and Lashira can also comment on it.
Oh, that's a really hard question, Pat. It's like picking your favorite child, and luckily I only have one child. Here's what I honestly think. I think the bill that we can pass and put on a governor's desk is going to be the most important. And I think that, there's been this long held belief that that's the background check bill. Unfortunately, as much as I'd like to think that's true, it hasn't seemed to play out for us. And so I think for me, it's the question of which one. They're all important and they're all serving they're solving different parts of the problem. And so my question is going to be, which one are we going to pass? Because once we show that there's bipartisan support for gun safety policy, once we put a bill on the governor's desk and we advance it and it starts to save lives, I think it starts to crack open those barriers and those walls around next steps of policy. And sadly, I think that means that it's going to be the one that we can, unfortunately, we've seen in the past around what's happened to people. So we moved the ghost gun bill after a community was shut down in Bucks County because someone was loose with a ghost gun after killing someone. And I hate to think about it that way. It's so atrocious. But my honest answer is, they're all important and solve different parts. So I can't pick. But if one starts to get momentum, I think we have to push it forward, because if we can move one and we can save some lives, then I think we'll open the gates for others. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's really an important point, Adam, because I think we do need to feel successful. And when we have one that moves forward and it is passed, it gives us that energy to continue working. Now, I have to be honest, I moved back to Pennsylvania a year ago. I lived in Washington State, and it seems like in Washington State, we had a lot more laws that were put into effect, bills that were passed related to gun violence than in Pennsylvania. So maybe it's more Lisa responding. So what do we have to do as voters to get our word out to you? I think you touched on it briefly.
You mean, well, so, as I said before, I think the most important thing is to reach out often, and I think demand some accountability from your legislators, whoever represents you, even others. It's so in my office, I tell people this all the time. When there are different issues happening, we keep track and we count, and I know other offices do. Like, the more we hear from people, the better it is. It shows that it's an important issue, and then certainly people telling us exactly how they feel about it is very important. I think the other thing to realize, and to your earlier question, if I had my choice, I would try to get the ERPO passed. It would be my hope to see that passed. I know it's probably in some cases it's a little tougher because people are afraid. People are fearful of losing their rights or having their rights infringed upon. So I think the other thing that we need to do as legislators, and working with people like Adam and Lashira, is to communicate to people what this legislation means and how, if you are a responsible gun owner, it's going to be fine. It's not going to impact you. And, when it comes to an ERPO bill, and I guess for me, so when I think about my community, I can think off the top of my head of about 6 incidences, probably in the past 5 years, of people who have either sadly had access to a gun at a really bad time in their life and were able to make a decision that impacts them permanently, as well as their family and their loved ones. And if we can help people to understand that is the work that we're trying to do. We're not trying to take guns from people who are being responsible. We are trying to make sure that there is a process to make sure that people who would do harm to themselves or to others can't access a gun any longer, or at least for a certain period of time. So to me, I think that could possibly save the most lives, because when you think about, and as Adam said, you don't want to think about these like kind of mass situations. You don't want to think about that. You don't want to think that there's a possibility, and sadly, it does seem like that happens more often. But I think what happens even more often is people who are access to guns that, they do something to themselves or to another person that maybe if they hadn't been in the situation they were in and they didn't have access to a gun, that would not have happened. So, I think that we need to do a better job of educating people so that people don't feel fearful, people don't feel like their rights are being infringed upon. And, this legislation will work for everyone. It will work for everyone, and it will save lives.
Thank you, Lisa. And I'm going to switch over to Lashira now, because one of the questions is like the funding for violence prevention programs, and it does take money. And I know that Senator Kearney did talk about Chester Crozier Medical Center. Now, that's not so much a funding thing, but it's also the trauma center that we're all hoping that stays open. So what words of wisdom can you share with us now?
I will say, like, this is an uncertain time across the world, right? And then for us in Delaware County, with the Crozier health system at risk, it really like enhanced this feeling of uncertainty. So what I will say that we have been doing proactively is connecting to as many medical providers, urgent care facilities, primary care doctors, in Delaware County and the state of Delaware, and even in Philadelphia County, just trying to identify wherever our residents may show up in the unfortunate situation if Crozier were to close. I'm just trying to make as many connections and collaborations as possible. And if they don't, we still want to maintain those connections because we want to be able to support our community members no matter where they show up. Another approach, and something that I think will be important for us, especially in Delaware County, I have been thinking about as a trauma-informed organization, that even the process or even the possibility of the hospital closing takes an emotional toll. Even as of today, when someone said, well, they're pushing the bankruptcy or the decision back to Friday, it's like, oh, so we're still stuck in this place of what's going to happen. So we've been having conversations around just creating space for community members, for Crozier employees to either process or not have to think about what's happening right now. And not in a way in which we're avoiding it, right? But taking care of ourselves during these times.
Yeah, very, very important point. And I also know, this is given the current administration and federal funding that is being cut back or is not available. And knowing that Chester Community Coalition is really dependent upon grant monies coming in from the federal government, coming in from outside organizations, from Common Experience health systems. Like, how concerned are you about funding coming in or the lack of funding?
As much as I want to say I'm not, I very, very, but again, I think with that, like, how do we turn that into purpose, right? So building relationships with these businesses and corporations that are located in Delaware County, and, informing them of the work that we do and with the support that we could potentially get from them, continuing to do programming, but also back to the importance of collaboration, right? I think that having a system or having partners in doing this work also creates opportunities for additional funding.
Thank you. Thank you. Adam,
I just, Pat, on
go
the
ahead.
last question, just to add in, I mean, I think we don't take government money for CVI programs because we don't do the amazing work that Lashira does on that. But I think that we're pretty concerned. And I think for many places right now, the state budgets are the conversation that's being had. And I don't envy Representative Borowski or any of the state reps who are going to have probably the toughest budget cycle in a long time because of numerous cuts from the federal level coming down. And I will say that what we know is that the funding for violence prevention programs, especially the type of hospital-based and intervention with the highest risk individuals, have a huge return on investment. So for every dollar spent, the state saves $5 in healthcare costs and criminal justice system costs and economic loss that doesn't happen. And so, if you're in a state that's in the midst of its budget season, and for sure we are in Pennsylvania, we are calling for $100 million in funding, 80 million for the violence intervention program, 20 million for what's known as Boost, which is a youth-based program. And I think the next 3 months are going to tell. And what we know, and I will say this as clearly as possible, is that states that pulled back and cities that pulled back on this funding, not after the pandemic really, but 10 years ago when it first started in Boston and Richmond and Illinois and Chicago, saw violence come back. This is a disease. And when you stop the treatment of a disease too early till you've cured it, any doctor will tell you it's going to come back and it's going to come back worse, whether it's an infection or the flu. And so, pulling back now will have devastating consequences. And so we've got to, like Lashira say, figure out how states and cities can fund it, and make it clear that if it doesn't happen in the same way we want, that frankly, the cuts at the federal level from the Trump administration are the reason why. And that's the consequence of this, because what Representative Borowski, I think I can say fairly, and she'll correct me if I'm wrong, is it's not that she doesn't want to fund those programs, but she is being forced to make impossible choices between school funding, between healthcare funding, between violence intervention. And so we need this in there, and I'm going to push her really hard to do it. And we're going to work together on it. But it is hard when you're talking about massive cuts to state budgets.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I'll just, so I don't want to spiral, because I will tell you that this whole funding situation has been on my mind, and very starkly, for the past several weeks. We are in the budget season here in Pennsylvania, as Adam has said. But the biggest concern for me has been, and what is happening on the federal level, is the idea that they can cut on the federal level and push it down to the states. And the states don't, we can't supplant money that we, for what the federal government was doing with money that we don't have. So here in Pennsylvania, investing in education is a huge issue. We are under a court order to fund our schools, because we had not been funding our schools as a state. And that is something we started to deliver on last year. And the plan is to move forward with that every year and ramp up the spending in order to level up our schools. It's created huge disparities, which I think, and Adam and Lashira can probably speak to this, education is just as important when it comes to combating this epidemic. When you have schools where the students don't have the same resources and the teachers don't have the same resources, you definitely see you see these disparities, and they manifest in different ways. And certainly gun violence is one of the ways that they tend to manifest. So investment in our schools is so important on so many levels. And I think that will also help with, the issues that, kind of lead to a lot of gun violence. So that is a huge priority for us. And, we have heard so much about cuts on the federal level. So I was just on a call last week with our senators' offices. The community programs funding for 2025 was completely cut. The number across the country is $16 billion cut from programs and services, programs that there is congressional funding and funding by the Senate. So those programs, none of them were concluded in the continuing resolution that was passed several weeks ago. And here in Delaware County, we're talking millions of dollars for programs, everything from, investments in our libraries and playgrounds and after-school programs. There's a huge list, just what our Congresswoman Mary Gay Scanlon had helped to fund and bring here, as well as former Senator Casey and Senator Fetterman. So those kinds of things also so important that now will not be funded. And it is a huge concern. A lot of times that is funding that is, it's federal and it's state funding together to make these things happen. We can't supplant that federal funding. The state has its needs, its priorities. I mean, we're going to work really hard, but there are going to be a lot of really tough choices. And a lot of that is being caused by what is happening on the federal level. Sorry, I'm on a little bit on a soapbox on that one.
Okay, and you were, but that's okay, because I think it needed to be said. Anything else that we want to say about this at this point? I know there's one question in the Q&A and this will be for Adam, and I think Lisa and Lashira also to respond, is the importance of Advocacy Day. We have in Pennsylvania, April 8th is coming on, and that's the big Advocacy Day that CeaseFire Pennsylvania supports.
Yeah, a lot of and I will say, just to say again, for my friends around the country, lots of my state partners in other states do this. Texas Gun Sense just held one with 500 plus people in Austin. God bless my friends in Texas. If we think we have it hard here in Pennsylvania, God bless Nicole. Seriously. But April 8th, we bring hundreds of Pennsylvanians to Harrisburg. There's a perception that you know, that the NRA and gun owners of America and these extremists are the majority, and polls don't tell the story. And so while we are working constantly with our partners and our volunteers to help push for these life-saving solutions, and every day we have to work on it, it is powerful to literally take over the Capitol with a sea of orange. And this isn't only about having you know, this is everyone being there. While CeaseFire PA puts a lot of time into organizing it, this is really about the community. I know from talking to one of my organizers today, we have over 25 faith leaders, including many of the Nuns Against Gun Violence coming with us. We'll have rabbis and imams and nuns and Episcopalian bishops all lobbying together. We're going to have doctors and pediatricians and the American Trauma Society of PA lobbying together. We're going to have folks like Lashira and her counterparts in Lehigh Valley at Promise Neighborhoods, Jeannie Garcia's group, and my friends at Amir Healing Center in Philadelphia there. We're going to have youth who are watching and hiding under their desk from everywhere from Woodland Area's Hill School District to Montgomery County. And we're coming together and saying, one, everyone in the state, this is what the state looks like, and we want an end to this crisis that, as Senator Kearney said, is uniquely American, not uniquely Pennsylvanian, but you know, we're just an example of this. And then we're going to push for funding for violence intervention programs. We're going to be talking to legislators about those problems. We're going to be talking to them about the common agenda. And out of that day, we make the case that we can advance and that they have to listen to us. The other thing I'll just say for folks from Pennsylvania is this is a day, it is helpful to have a moment that feels like it's like election day or spiking the football at the touchdown. But the season goes on and the game goes on, right? And it's not enough for us just to have one day. So we're going to win on April 8th. We're going to have a big day. We're going to be together and we're going to hold hands and we're going to join together. But then we've got to go back and get back to it the next day. Because every day, I promise you, the gun industry and the extremists and the NRA are lobbying hard and sending emails and making up information that's not true. And so every day, we then are using this to work with everyone who's there to really make the case that we have to take that next step forward so we can put those bills back in front of Rep. Borowski and others. They can vote on it, send it to the Senate, and then also meet with senators so we can get the Senate to finally do the right thing and put it on the governor's desk. If you haven't RSVP'd, I guess there is still time. I can try to, I actually can't drop links in the chat, but I'm guessing Pat will send out the information, you know, if you know folks in Pennsylvania. And I will also just add, if you are from around the country, because again, please just email me. I think, Pat, feel free to share my contact info. I work with our state partners in every state, and they know better than anyone what's going on in their community. I was just hanging out with my friend Heather in Georgia last week. When I was down in Atlanta, I was just talking to my friend Whitney in Kentucky, who runs Whitney Strong, and Jess in Oregon. They're on the ground and understand what that community and what that state can do. And so I'm happy to connect folks if you're elsewhere with your local state organization, or if there's not one of your wonderful national partners, because I love my friends at Giffords and Brady and elsewhere.
Well, thank you, Adam. And I will say the Nuns Against Gun Violence are meeting on Thursday. And I will again share, you know, the CeaseFire's Advocacy Day. But I think you all do a great job getting that message out because I get numerous messages from you. And at this point, it's in the chat box now, ceasefirepA.org, so people can go to the website and see what CeaseFire does. Now, at this point, I'm going to give our panelists a little breather. I'm going to ask Angela McParland to come to continue the conversation about advocacy, the importance of advocacy. So I'd like everybody else just to give a round of applause to our speakers. You did a great job. Thank you. Angela, you're on.
Yeah, thank you all so much. So my name is Angie Howard McParland, and I serve on the steering committee for Nuns Against Gun Violence, along with Pat and Maria and Dorothy and Jennifer and so many other wonderful folks here, sisters, and those of us who are lay folks that have the privilege of working with sisters. And my job, I think, at the end of this webinar is to take, well, first of all, to say that Pennsylvania has really been a model of exactly what we had hoped to do with Nuns Against Gun Violence, which was to empower sisters, empower associates, and folks on the ground, right, at that national level, coming together as sisters to partner with organizations, with state reps, with community partners who are doing this work, and to lend that faith-based voice. So I just want to lift up that I think what's been happening in the collaboration in Pennsylvania has been so exciting for all of us to watch. And so it's really great to see. So thank you for that. So my job here is to say a little bit about the current advocacy efforts that Nuns Against Gun Violence have going on. So I'm going to take us from our spotlight on Pennsylvania and the local level and going to zoom it way, 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 way out, really to a global level, because we do lots of different state, local, and federal advocacy. But for this Lenten season, which we just have a few more weeks left in, our focus was on that intersection between gun violence and immigration, right? Immigration has become the hot button issue in our country right now for a million reasons. And we think it's crucial to look at the root causes of that migration, many of which include the way that weapons and guns are trafficked from the US across the border into Mexico, into Haiti, and into Latin America, and really around the world, right? And those guns, those weapons fuel the violence from which people then have to escape. So that's been part of our focus this Lent. What I'm gonna do, I'm not a great multitasker, so I'm gonna talk and then I'm gonna drop the links in the chat to share. And I'm sure we'll have an email coming out as well for folks to see everything in one place. But what we have 2 letters that are ready to go. Folks can copy them and drop them in an email to their senators and to their representatives. Or we have lots of sisters in retirement centers that prefer good old pen and paper. You can also print them out and do it that way. So I'm going to put those letters in the chat. We also have a petition with lots of different partners like the Quixote Center and Pax Christi USA and numbers of different congregations. And this petition is to the Department of Homeland Security, asking them to take the very evidence-based steps that can safeguard exports, particularly in the Miami River. And so the petition is for individuals to sign, not just organizations. So we really encourage folks to take this petition and then to spread it as far and wide as they can. And then we'll be culminating with an in-person action at the Department of Homeland Security in late May. So you can still sign the petition even if you're not planning to join us in DC. And then the last thing I'm going to drop in the chat about our current advocacy efforts is an action alert. It's one of those one-click alerts that you can click on and the message will go to your senator and or rep. And this is on a piece of federal legislation called the Stop Arming Cartels Act. This is a bill that is that does many things, but one of the main thrusts of it is banning 50 caliber rifles, which are more powerful than assault weapons. They can penetrate taxiing airplanes and armored vehicles and just wild things that really have no place on the streets. And they're favored by many of the criminal organizations across the border. And so one of the many things that this bill would do would be to ban those particular weapons and get those, and also reinforce some background checks and things like that. So that action alert will be in the chat as well. Again, it's a one-click that you can share. So lots of different ways to take hyper-local advocacy efforts and then also to zoom that out and to really deal with this issue on the global level. So thanks to all of you for that.
Thank you, Angela. So I think at this point, excuse me, we are ready for our closing prayer. So I'm going to call on Sister Dorothy. And she's still with us because I can see her.
Unmute myself. So this is our moment. This is the crossing place. This is the time we embrace our choice to make a difference. Perhaps this is the moment for which you have been created. Perhaps, look around us. Not perhaps. This is the moment for which you and I have been created. Remember who you are. This is the time when Esther had to choose, had to get the courage to stand before the king and plead for the life of her people. Her uncle Mordecai stressed to her that this is the moment she was born for. Why was this beautiful young Jewish maiden chosen by the king to be his queen, kept in hiding, kept in secret, because she was a Jewish woman whom he loved? She risked her life because she believed that this was the moment for which she was created. We need to remember the gift that has been given to each of us. We're called to be fire on the earth, filled with the Spirit of God. We're called to be women and men of compassion. We are called to look beyond all that could divide us, to bring the good news that in God we all abide. And Adam, you spoke of that so beautifully. We are called to a larger vision of a world in harmony. We are called to live in the Spirit, the source of love and unity. No, not perhaps. Not perhaps. But this is the moment for which you and I have been created. Can we say, yes, Lord? Yes, Lord. Amen.
Thank you, Dorothy, for that, excuse me, beautiful closing prayer. And I've been reminded that Sister Marie Lucy has her hand up. So if we can move to one of our participants. Marie, you have something to share? Just need to unmute yourself.
No, forget it. No.
Be
Cancel,
sure
cancel.
to cancel. All right, you're forgiven. All right, then we're going to move to Angela for closing final thank you.
Just a huge thank you to all three panelists. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your advocacy efforts. All three of these different areas of the community partners and the state legislature and the gun violence prevention organization, it's all just so crucial together. So thank you so much for your time and sharing so much of it with us. Thank you so much to Pat and to Maria for organizing this, the first in our state spotlight series of webinars, and to Dorothy for doing our beautiful prayers, and to Jennifer, who was off camera there for so much of the tech and setup and really just keeping us moving here. So thank you all so much, and stay tuned. The links were all in the chat. So please do feel free to check those out. And if you're not already, we'll get folks on the email list for Nuns Against Gun Violence. Thank you.
Okay, and Jennifer, can we put those links into the recording if people are going to get the recording?
Mm.
Thank you. So thank you all for this evening. This brings this webinar to a close. So you're free to go enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.